let's get ready to make a practice scratchboard. So starting out, here is my example of what it is that we will be creating. And here we go. We are gonna make a mini practice scratchboard using this image, and just kind of this is how you do a general scratchboard, but this is also a great way to, I guess, learn how to without the pressure of using a really nice scratchboard. So I always start with kind of giving myself outlines. This is not a required step. Sometimes people do this with just pen, pencil, marker. Doesn't really matter. It's a personal preference. I like marker just because it stands out the most. So when I do this, we're gonna zoom in here so you can see a little better. But essentially, I'm just outlining general forms. Okay, so I outline my building here. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. So you can see how I do this. But some of those more fine areas, maybe I don't want to use a marker. Once again, it's personal preference. Test it out. It kind of depends on your image too. So like I can see like this is the general area of where it's kind of a gray to a darker gray. And then this area is kind of a lighter to a medium gray. Again, not a requirement. It just kind of helps me see that stuff a little bit better. Now this is a smaller space, so I'm going to give myself an outline here for that building. If I'm looking, there's a little shadow here, a little highlight here. All right, then I have my windows. Again, I'm only outlining these because I want to, but I do not have to do this part. So that's probably all the farther that I'm gonna do with that. Once you have kind of those outlines, or if you're skipping them, make sure you have your name and an hour on it. All right, and then basically all that you do is you can actually kind of see it. It's kind of tough to tell through here, but I can see where my image is, so I don't have to do any shading up here, but you're gonna do a graphite transfer. So you could take a pencil, if you have a graphite stick, those work out really nice because they're a little bit faster. But all that it is you just do a medium value or medium pressure graphite. And actually, like I found that like your graphite sticks work really nicely for this, but so do like mechanical pencils, because it's a softer lead, so it transfers a little bit easier. There are people that will use like white chalk, and that works out pretty well. But I'm just going through and essentially just scribbling over the entire thing. Okay, again, I don't have to do that top part because I know that that's where my words are, so I don't have to worry about that part. So some people kind of do this differently. I could tape it to the table. I could just tape it to the back of it. But basically, I'm just gonna line this up. That's what I do. All right. Get my piece of tape, just a little one. Okay. And then since I have it lined up, I'm gonna go here. Now, if I wanted to, I could shift it up and I could just like fold that section over. It doesn't really matter. Again, it's just to kind of help with that practice and figure out what you like and don't like. So from here, you can take a pen or pencil. You could take the back end of your scratch kit, or scratching pen, doesn't matter. But I could go through like this, and I'm just using a medium pressure. Doesn't take a ton. Like I said, I kind of like using a pencil because then I can see where it is that I've drawn. Just take some medium pressure. Again, not having to be perfect. Just kind of giving myself general guidelines. It's kind of all that it is. So I don't have to guess on location, proportion, or anything like that. And now the image is going to be the one that tells me what values I'm using. So from there, if I did this properly, it's really tough to see, I know, with the shiny, but you can kind of see how those outlines are transferred. All right, so from there, I like to just take this carefully off the back and have it next to my project, because then as I'm working, I will constantly be shifting back and forth. Now that we are all prepped, it is time to scratch. So starting out, I always like to make sure that I'm having all my lines drawn. Sometimes you have to go back in and double check. It happens to all of us. It's fine. And then you basically just start with your highlights. So identify those areas that are the brightest spaces. Sometimes it's subtly brighter, sometimes it's super brighter. So when you're looking at the brightness of that wall, right, like overall it's pretty consistent, but I started with what I thought was the brightest place on that wall. Now this wall is a continuation of it, and so therefore I am kind of following the same line work, same value, all that stuff, but maybe spacing out my lines, maybe using some longer lines just to kind of create a little bit of that direction within that wall, right? And then I just kind of build it as we go along. Now this other little section down here has a similar value to it. So same thing, kind of doing the similar line work. I just think it kind of helps with that unity overall. And then it's time to go back in. Now, I noticed that on this wall, like there is a shadow there. It is slight, but that shadow does matter with the success of this. So that's why I drew that line that I had missed earlier. I'm keeping with similar line quality, line thickness, line directions, just so it still feels like it's all a part of the one wall. But after I have that base value, then it's time to go in and really kind of start to brighten up those areas that are a little bit lighter. A little change makes a big difference with these scratch boards. So I started out with a medium bright because then I can make it brighter. If I start out by going straight to bright, then I can't really do a whole lot from there. But I have more control if I start with medium and then go back in and refine, and then I can clean up those edges and make sure that I'm scratching all the way to the edge of that shape so that my shapes are nice and crisp and that the forms are looking good and strong. And I just kind of keep building up my values from there, really with a focus on those highlights. So some of you are going to maybe struggle a little bit with these. A lot of this is just figuring out the angle for the blades. You can actually feel the area that has a little bit of grab to it on your finger. They're not sharp, but there is a side that is going to actually like scratch the paper, and there's a side that's not going to do much of anything. So make sure that you're paying attention to that, especially when you have finer lines like this. Now with the garage, I kind of went back in and added just slightly fine lines to that side that had more of the highlight so that there was a difference. Same thing, like I'm just going through and adding very subtle details. It's barely dragging on the paper. If you're holding the pen in the correct direction, it does not take much pressure to make any adjustments on that page. So if you notice, like I'm just dragging that on there. And so really just make sure that you're paying attention to that pressure. Should not take a lot of pressure because that actually ends up it's gonna kind of ruin your quality of it as you're working through that. So I recommend usually kind of hopping around on your sections and just kind of really working from those brightest to the medium values and continuously moving on. Now I'm leaving the one shadow, the shadow wall, I guess you could say, black, and then I'm outlining it there to create a little bit more of a definition between it. But on the left side where I have the highlighted wall, I'm leaving kind of like a halo shadow type thing, I guess you could say, where I'm not, scratching all the way up to that wall. So that creates a little bit more contrast between my values. So that's one technique that some people will do. Now I do a lot of cross hatching throughout to help unify. Again, having similar lines throughout help unify it. As I am working my way out in that sky. I'm continuing that cross hatching, but I'm spacing out my lines more and making it even lighter or more wispy. And that really helps kind of create that value change, right? I have those bright areas and I have the darker areas, and I want more of a transition. I don't want sections. With the walls, there are sections because there are hard lines to where those walls are, versus the sky kind of flows together. So be intentional with the techniques that you're using as you are testing them out with this. So as I was fine tuning, I realized that this wall was not completed. So I went through, I realized that that wall is in shadow. So value wise, it actually matches the other shadow walls, but it needs to be different because there's a doorway on there. And that door is a little bit more in shadow than the wall is. So in order to create that effect, I used a very, very slight pressure in order to create some very, very slight lines to create that wall to be in a dark shadow. So it's a really, really dark gray, basically. And so it's a lot of like delicate work, delicate pressure, and then going back in and really just kind of fine tuning those shadows just to create a little bit of difference. A little bit of difference makes a big difference on these. So I'm not going through and trying to make it realistic. I'm just trying to match the values. And that's the whole point with all these. So as you're scratching, kind of notice the direction that works for you. Like most of mine, I scratch kind of towards me. You can kind of see how I was holding the pen there. So you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work for you, but it's not back and forth like normal. So think about how to unify your pieces, and good luck.